The air inside the old county barn was thick with dust and heat, the kind that settles into your lungs and makes every breath feel heavy. It was auction day in Spring Valley, an event that brought out ranchers, drifters, and a handful of kids in faded baseball caps. They came for bargains, for spectacle, sometimes just for the chance to scoff at someone else's misfortune. Horses shifted uneasily in their stalls, nickering and stamping as strangers moved up and down the aisles, eyes scanning for strength or flaw. Eli Collins stood near the back wall, hands shoved in the pockets of his threadbare jeans. At 17, he looked younger, slender, with a quiet presence that never quite fit in. The other boys from school clustered near the entrance, their laughter carrying across the barn like slaps. "That's the Collins kid. Here he talks to animals more than people." They didn't bother lowering their voices. Eli didn't meet their eyes. He was used to it. The auctioneer's gavel slammed on the block, jolting everyone to attention. A chestnut Mustang was led out, ribs visible beneath its dull coat, eyes wide and wild. The handler tugged the rope. The horse flinched, skittering sideways, panic flashing in every muscle. The crowd's mood shifted from boredom to amusement. "Here's a prize. Any takers?" the auctioneer called, half mocking, already expecting silence. No one raised a hand. One rancher snorted, "Worthless." Another joked, "That one's got more ghosts than legs." Laughter echoed. Eli stared at the horse. Rusty, he'd later call him. Something in those eyes, a raw, searching fear that mirrored the ache Eli carried every day. The feeling of being seen as less, the need to run, but with nowhere to go. The auctioneer was about to move on, but Eli's hand shot up, trembling. 500! The words seemed to hang in the air, absurd, too loud for such a quiet boy. For a moment, even the laughter stopped. Then it crashed over him, a wall of jeers, whistles, voices taunting. Must have lost his mind. Hope he likes wasting money. Eli's face burned, pulse hammering in his ears, but he didn't lower his hand. Someone behind him called out, "Kid can barely buy lunch, and he's buying that bag of bones." Eli's mouth tasted like dust, but he stood his ground. The auctioneer's voice softened, just for a beat, then, "Sold. 500 to the young man in the back." There was no applause, only a ripple of disbelief as Eli approached the block, his boots scuffing on the cracked concrete. He tried to quiet his hands, reaching for the rope. Rusty rolled his eyes, nostrils flaring, body tense as a wire. Eli felt his own chest tighten, fear and hope all tangled. As he led Rusty outside, every eye on them, a few parting shots from the crowd stung his back. The barn door banged shut behind them, and suddenly the world felt empty and enormous. Outside, the sun was low, painting the dry grass gold. Eli started down the gravel road toward his grandfather's ranch, one hand holding Rusty's lead, the other clutching the envelope with his savings. Every step was uncertain. The horse spooked at shadows. Eli's legs shook. But there was something else. An ember, maybe. The chance, however small, that saving Rusty might save a piece of himself too. They walked in silence, the barn's noise replaced by the rasp of gravel and the sound of Rusty's uneven breathing. The horse paused often, as if deciding whether to bolt or follow. Eli talked, not in words but in the steady, patient rhythm of his steps. His mind replayed the laughter, the looks. Each one stung, but none could drown out the pull of what he'd just done. As dusk crept in, the ranch came into view. Splintered fences, a tired barn, and the faint light in his grandfather's window. Eli stopped at the gate. He watched Rusty's ears twitch, the wary glance in his eye. the hunger hidden behind fear. Eli didn't know how to fix broken things, not horses, not himself, but for the first time, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, trying was enough. He led Rusty into the barn, heart still racing, and settled him in a corner stall. The barn was cool and shadowy, the air tinged with hay and oil. Eli crouched nearby, not touching, just being. Rusty stood at the far end, sides heaving, eyes wide. The last traces of daylight slipped away, leaving only the steady thump of Eli's heart and the slow, uncertain breathing of a boy and a horse, both outsiders, both searching for a second chance. In that fragile stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Not hope exactly, but the start of it. Eli leaned against the stall, eyes heavy, and let himself feel it. The ache of humiliation, the burn of uncertainty, and underneath it all, the smallest flicker of belonging. He whispered a promise only he could hear. Tonight, he'd begin again. Morning spilled through the cracks in the old barn, lighting up motes of dust that floated in the still air. Eli woke early, the ache of yesterday still sharp in his chest. He moved quietly, pulling on a faded flannel and boots still caked with old mud. Outside, the world was gray and hushed, just the hush of wind in dry grass and the distant sound of cattle in the hills. Inside the barn, Rusty stood rigid in his stall, pressed against the far wall. He hadn't eaten the small pile of oats Eli left the night before. The bucket of water was barely touched. For a long moment, Eli just watched him, scared, battered, not just hungry, but wary of hope. The silence between them stretched, broken only by Rusty's restless shifting and the slow creak of the barn rafters. Eli's grandfather, Harold, stepped in, the door swinging open with a heavy groan. He was a large man, his hair gone white, his face worn by sun and wind. He took in the scene, the scrawny horse, the silent boy, and let out a sigh that was half exasperation, half concern. He didn't bother hiding the look in his eyes. Pity, maybe, or just the old, tired disappointment Eli had felt 1,000 times. Harold leaned on the stall rail, his voice gruff. "Don't get your hopes up, Eli. Some things can't be fixed. You could have saved your money for something useful." He shook his head, more weary than cruel, but the words landed heavy. Eli flinched, holding back the urge to argue, to explain the feeling that pushed him to raise his hand at the auction. What could he say that would make sense? He just shrugged, gaze locked on Rusty. They ate breakfast in silence. The old radio on the kitchen counter played a country song about broken hearts and old trucks. Harold talked about fence repairs, the weather, the price of hay. Eli barely tasted his eggs, mind spinning. He could already imagine the talk in town, the boys at school, the ranchers at the diner, all shaking their heads, laughing behind their hands. The Collins kid, always dreaming, never learning. By noon, the whispers had already made their way to the local diner. Eli went in to pick up feed, shoulders hunched as he passed a booth of boys from school. They watched him, waiting for a reaction, the familiar glint in their eyes. "Hey, Eli, got any tips for picking a real horse next time?" One called out, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Another mimed buckling under a heavy load, staggering with invisible reins. The laughter swelled, and Eli kept moving, keeping his head down, clutching the sack of grain so tightly his knuckles whitened. Outside, the sunlight was harsh. Eli stood for a moment, breathing in the dry air, trying to swallow the shame that curled in his stomach. Doubt nipped at him, sharp, relentless. Maybe they were right. Maybe Rusty was too broken to save. Maybe he was too. The afternoon crawled by. Eli did his chores, hauling water, repairing a sagging fence, raking up old straw, but his thoughts kept circling back to the barn. Each time he passed the open doors, he felt the weight of Rusty's gaze, the silent question there. "What do you want from me?" Eli didn't have an answer. All he knew was the ache inside, the way he saw himself reflected in that horse's battered frame. As dusk bled across the fields, Eli slipped back into the barn, the day's defeat heavy on his shoulders. He settled in the straw near Rusty's stall, careful not to move too fast, letting the quiet settle between them. Rusty stood motionless, muscles tensed, eyes flicking from the boy to the window and back. Eli wanted to reach out, to make a promise, but words felt useless, childish. So he sat, knees drawn up to his chest, listening to the slow, uncertain rhythm of Rusty's breathing. He remembered the auction, the laughter, his own trembling hand. The humiliation was still fresh, raw. The urge to quit, just walk away and forget, rose in his throat, bitter and real. But then he saw it. A small, almost invisible flick of Rusty's ears in his direction. A pause in that endless, anxious shifting. Eli's breath caught. Hope, so slight it could be mistaken for nothing at all. He didn't say anything out loud, but inside he made a promise. "I won't give up on you, even if no one else believes, even if I'm the only one left." He stayed like that until the barn was dark and cold, the stars bright above the sagging roof. Hours passed, Eli nearly dozing. At one point, Rusty took a tentative step closer, the old wood groaning beneath his hooves. He sniffed the bucket, still wary, but lingered near the gate. The barn felt less empty, the hush less lonely. Late that night, Eli rose, bones aching. He stood, brushing hay from his jeans, and glanced once more at Rusty. The horse's eyes, wary but alert, followed him all the way to the door. For the first time, Eli didn't feel entirely alone. Doubt and fear still sat heavy on his chest, but something had shifted, some quiet agreement made in the dark, the start of a fragile trust. He left the barn with his promise unbroken, hope flickering beneath the doubt, determined to try again at sunrise. Eli's days fell into a gentle, stubborn rhythm. School in the morning, chores in the afternoon, evenings spent in the hushed dim of the barn with Rusty. While other boys lost themselves in football practice or pickup trucks, Eli chose the quiet company of a horse no one else wanted, and a silence that was slowly learning how to speak. Each afternoon, he'd sit in the straw by Rusty's stall, sometimes reading from battered old books he found in his grandfather's attic. Stories about wild horses, distant canyons, broken things put back together. Sometimes he just sat, head bowed, letting his presence be enough. He brought Rusty small apples and handfuls of oats, never pushing too close, just leaving them within reach and waiting. The air in the barn felt thick with watching, listening, waiting. The world outside rolled on. School was a blur of whispered jokes and sidelong glances. At home, Harold's voice grumbled from the kitchen about slow progress and wasted money. But Eli heard the softer edges. His grandfather no longer scolded, just muttered with tired worry. The wind grew cooler as fall crept in, carrying the promise of frost. Each night, Eli bundled up in his old jacket and slipped out to the barn, letting the moonlight guide him. Rusty's healing was slow, nearly invisible. The first breakthrough came as quietly as a sigh. One afternoon, Eli caught the horse watching him, not with wild suspicion, but with the soft, uncertain curiosity of a creature unused to kindness. Rusty still flinched at sudden movement, still eyed the gate as if expecting disaster. But he began to eat from the pile of hay left just inside the stall. By the end of the week, he'd nibbled an apple from Eli's open palm, muzzle trembling, ready to bolt at the smallest noise. Eli barely dared to breathe. The smallest touch, the brush of Rusty's whiskers, felt like a miracle. After school one Thursday, rain drummed steadily on the barn roof. Eli slipped inside, dropping his backpack just outside the door. The world was gray, soft with the sound of falling water. He settled onto a bale of hay and began to read, voice low and steady. His words blended with the rain. Rusty shifted closer, drawn by the sound, ears flicking. Eli kept reading, page after page, sometimes pausing just to let the quiet stretch between them. Days passed this way. The old barn became a world of its own, filled with the gentle scrape of hooves, the creak of the rafters, the low hum of Eli's voice, the slow dance of trust growing inch by inch. Sometimes the progress felt invisible. Sometimes, Eli wondered if he was only imagining it, the way Rusty's head lifted a little higher, the subtle gleam in his once dull eyes. One evening, just after sunset, Eli sat with his knees drawn to his chest, watching Rusty chew quietly. He traced the patterns of dust and old paint on the barn walls, feeling his own worries settle, growing lighter with each quiet minute. For the first time in months, the loneliness that had hung over him began to thin, replaced by the shy warmth of companionship. It wasn't a loud, sweeping change. It was the kind of healing you noticed only when you looked back and saw how far you'd come. Rusty stepped forward, muzzle brushing Eli's knee. It was so gentle, Eli almost missed it. The hesitant nudge of trust offered and received. He held his breath, heart pounding, and then let out a long, shaky exhale, fighting the urge to grin. Rusty didn't bolt. He lingered, eyes half closed, sharing the small circle of safety they'd built together. There were setbacks, too. A slammed door, a distant clap of thunder, the accidental scrape of a shovel. All could send Rusty skittering to the far side of the stall, sides heaving, trust shattered in an instant. Eli learned to move more slowly, to watch for warning signs, to be patient in ways he'd never been taught. Healing, he realized, was not a straight path. Some days were harder than others, but the tiny victories kept him coming back. Over time, Eli's confidence grew in quiet, secret ways. He carried himself a little straighter, met his grandfather's gaze a little more often. The boys at school still whispered, but their words no longer clung to him like burrs. He found solace in the barn, in the simple repetition of caring for Rusty, in the softness of the horse's breath, and the gradual brightening of his coat. One afternoon, after helping Harold patch a broken fence, Eli hurried to the barn, hands still stained with dirt. He opened the gate, expecting the usual wariness, but Rusty greeted him with a soft whicker, stepping forward without fear. Eli reached out, hand trembling, and Rusty pressed his forehead gently into Eli's palm. The world seemed to pause. In that moment, every lonely day, every whispered taunt, every pang of doubt melted away. Eli understood then. He wasn't just saving Rusty. With every act of patience, every quiet evening, he was mending something broken in himself. Each tiny breakthrough, each shared silence, stitched shut the old wounds of being overlooked, misunderstood, left out. The barn became a sanctuary, not just for Rusty, but for Eli too. In the soft hush of falling night, surrounded by the scents of hay and old wood, a boy and his horse found the fragile beginnings of hope. And for the first time in a long time, Eli allowed himself to believe they both deserved it. A thin mist clung to the ranch as autumn deepened, turning the hills a brittle gold. The routine Eli and Rusty had built felt delicate, an unspoken truce. Mornings started with slow footsteps and careful voices. Evenings ended in the barn's hush, the world outside fading to nothing as the boy and horse sat in quiet companionship. But healing, Eli learned, was not a gentle, upward line. It happened on a Sunday, the kind that began lazy and bright. Eli let Rusty out into the corral, hoping the horse would stretch his legs and enjoy a little freedom. The corral was small, rimmed with weathered wood, dry grass curling up through the rails. Rusty walked the perimeter, head low, careful. Eli settled on a fence post, book in hand, letting the late sun warm his back. A sudden clang, maybe a bucket knocked over, maybe a distant truck backfiring, split the calm. Rusty's head shot up, his whole body tensed, every muscle quivering with old memories. In a blink he bolted, hooves pounding against the hard ground, sending up clouds of dust. He ran the fence line, eyes wild, mane flying, unable to find a way out, unable to trust the world wouldn't hurt him again. Eli jumped to his feet, instinct screaming to give chase. For a heartbeat, fear twisted inside him, but he stopped, digging his boots into the earth. He remembered those first days in the barn, the silence, the slow patience. Instead of running, Eli crouched down, making himself small, letting his presence be a safe harbor instead of another storm. Rusty tore around the corral, breath coming hard, sweat darkening his coat. Eli fought the urge to shout, to call, to close the distance. He forced himself to wait. Minutes dragged by. The other horses in the far pasture watched, ears flicking, but stayed out of it, as if they too understood this was Rusty's battle to win. Slowly, the panic bled from Rusty's movements. His wild eyes flicked to Eli, then to the fence, then back again. Each circuit brought him closer. Each lap was a question. Can I trust you not to hurt me? Will you force me or wait for me? Eli held his breath, hands clenched at his sides. When Rusty finally stopped, sides heaving, he was just a few feet away. Dust hung in the sunlight, turning the air gold and thick. The silence was so deep, Eli could hear his own heart hammering. Saw Rusty lowered his head, nostrils flaring, and took a trembling step forward. Eli's relief was a quiet flood, warm, gentle, careful not to spook the fragile peace. He rose, moving slowly, letting Rusty come the last distance. He held out his hand, palm open, and waited. Rusty sniffed it, his breath soft and hot, then nudged Eli's fingers with his nose. Eli felt the moment settle in his bones, a quiet victory that hummed louder than any applause. That night, Eli sat by Rusty in the barn, both of them exhausted, their edges worn thin. He didn't talk. There was nothing to say. Instead, he offered Rusty a handful of oats. For the first time, Rusty ate from his palm, chewing slowly, eyes half-lidded in the lantern's glow. Eli watched, awe mixed with gratitude, a sense that every small triumph was its own kind of miracle. In the days that followed, Eli thought about that afternoon, the terror, the chase, the waiting. He realized that healing wasn't about never being afraid, never stumbling, never running. It was about coming back after the fear, rebuilding trust after every setback. The path wasn't straight. Some days, it was barely a path at all. But every time Rusty came back, every time he reached for Eli instead of running, it meant the world was changing. Just a little. Harold, watching from the kitchen window, noticed it too. The old man's voice had softened, his eyes less quick to find disappointment. He still grumbled about chores and bills and the way the world was always shifting beneath their feet. But sometimes at dusk, Eli caught him standing near the barn, hands deep in his pockets, gaze lingering on the corral with something like pride. Eli's thoughts began to drift toward the future. At the breakfast table, a faded flyer for the Spring Valley Rodeo sat between bills and catalogs. Eli turned it over in his hands, the edges soft from years of handling. He knew what the others would say. He'd heard it all before. "You'll embarrass yourself. That horse isn't ready." But Eli saw something different. He didn't want to win or prove anyone wrong. He wanted to give Rusty a chance to show the world what no one else had bothered to see. Training started with the smallest things. Walking circles in the corral, stopping, starting, learning to listen to each other's breath. Some days, progress was invisible. A shared look, a relaxed ear, a nudge instead of a flinch. Other days, Rusty balked, eyes clouding with fear, old wounds surfacing with the sound of a gate or the flicker of a shadow. But always, Eli came back. Always he found new ways to try. Softer words, longer silences, more patience than he knew he possessed. And slowly, Rusty answered. Not with perfection, but with effort. Not with blind trust, but with the fragile courage to try again. The days grew shorter, the air sharper. Eli and Rusty spent long afternoons beneath wide western skies, practicing, failing, trying again. Each sunset brought them closer, not to victory, but to understanding. And as the rodeo date circled closer on the calendar, Eli felt the fear knotting in his stomach give way to something else. Not confidence, not certainty, but hope. The stubborn, ordinary, everyday kind that says, maybe this time, things will be different. Eli stood by Rusty's stall one evening, brushing the horse's coat as dusk settled blue around them. The barn was quiet, the world holding its breath. We're not here to win, Eli thought, not needing words. We're here to try. And sometimes, that was enough. The first frost left a silvery sheen on the fields, marking the start of rodeo season in Spring Valley. Mornings were brisk, every breath a small cloud. Each day before sunrise, Eli stepped into the chill, hands numb as he fed Rusty, shoveling oats with careful patience, his mind always ticking forward. The Spring Valley Rodeo was just weeks away, a fixed point on the horizon, both terrifying and electric. Training was slow, almost painfully so. At first, Rusty balked at every saddle, every rope, every unfamiliar sound. Eli's approach was gentle. Each session began and ended with a calm word, a soft touch, a small reward. If Rusty refused, Eli started over, never pushing, always waiting for the horse to give a sign. Some days brought only setbacks. On others, Rusty took a step further, trotting a straight line, pausing at the right cue, standing still when Eli dropped the lead. Neighbors sometimes stopped by the fence, hats pulled low, boots scuffing at the dirt. "That horse'll never make it," they'd say, voices carrying, half mocking, half just resigned to their old ideas. "Collins, you ought to put your energy somewhere useful." Eli heard them, every word scraping at his hope, but he kept his eyes on Rusty, letting the work drown out the noise. Even Harold, watching from the porch, would shake his head at times, muttering about money and time and lost causes. Yet some evenings, Eli found his grandfather leaning against the barn door, watching quietly as the boy and horse circled the corral in the fading light. The old man said nothing, but his presence lingered, like a silent offer of belief, just waiting to be claimed. School became background noise, a blur of homework, blank stares, and teachers calling on him less and less. Eli's world narrowed to the hours between dawn and dusk, the long walks along frosted fences, and the warm, pulsing quiet of Rusty's stall. Each morning, he brushed Rusty's coat until it shone, fingers finding every scar, every bump, a silent record of battles survived. A week before the rodeo, Eli tried a practice run in the empty pasture. He set up small jumps using old barrels and fence rails. The first attempts were rough. Rusty knocked the rails loose, stumbled over his own feet, shied at the flapping of a stray tarp. Eli's face burned with frustration, memories of laughter from the auction and diner echoing in his mind. For a split second, he almost shouted, almost let the bitterness spill over. But he caught himself, swallowing the urge. Instead, he walked Rusty back to the barn, letting the day end on a note of calm. That night, as a cold wind rattled the eaves, Eli lay awake in his narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. Doubt pressed in, heavy as a stone. He wondered if the townsfolk were right. Maybe he was only setting himself up for more ridicule. Maybe Rusty would always be the worthless Mustang, and Eli always the outcast kid who couldn't let go of broken things. Yet, when morning came, Eli rose before the sun. The next day, and the day after, he tried again. Training shifted. Instead of chasing perfection, Eli focused on connection, matching his breath to Rusty's, finding the rhythm in their movements, learning to see through the horse's fear rather than around it. He stopped worrying about how it looked to anyone else. Each small improvement, a clean jump, a steady halt, was its own quiet victory. On the morning of the rodeo, the ranch buzzed with an anxious energy. Harold woke early, already dressed and standing at the window with 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't say much, just handed Eli the cup and patted his shoulder. The gesture was awkward, but it meant everything. Eli braided Rusty's mane with careful fingers, then wiped down the old, battered saddle. When he finished, he stood back and looked at his horse, not at the ribs still faintly showing, or the old scars, but at the bright alertness in Rusty's eyes. There was a life there now, a spark that nothing, no jeer, no doubt, could smother. The rodeo grounds were loud and teeming. Trucks lined the lot, banners snapped in the wind, and the smell of popcorn and manure hung thick in the air. Families crowded the stands, calling out to riders and horses alike. Eli led Rusty through the chaos, heart pounding, hands slick with sweat. The crowd's noise pressed in, but he tried to focus on the soft rhythm of Rusty's hooves, the quiet strength beneath the horse's trembling skin. They waited in a dusty pen behind the arena. Other riders eyed Eli's horse, some snickering, some whispering about the lost cause and the Collins boy with his rescue Mustang. Eli felt the old shame flicker, like a bruise that never fully faded. But he refused to look away. He stroked Rusty's neck, murmuring a soundless promise. When their number was called, Eli mounted up, feeling every eye in the crowd. He guided Rusty toward the arena gate, the roar of voices swelling, the bright glare of lights making everything too sharp, too vivid. For a second, Eli's hands shook. Rusty hesitated, ears twitching, uncertain. And then, with a gentle nudge and a long, calming exhale, Eli led Rusty into the ring. The noise faded to a hum. All that remained was the space between boy and horse, the hard-packed dirt underfoot, and the chance, the only chance, to show the world what hope and second chances could become. They crossed the starting line together. The rodeo arena blazed with noise and light, banners snapping in the brisk wind, the crowd restless and eager for spectacle. Eli sat atop Rusty, feeling the horse's tension ripple through the saddle, every muscle taut as a drawn wire. Around them, polished riders adjusted fancy tack, their horses gleaming with health and breeding. Rusty, ribs still faintly showing under a newly brushed coat, looked every bit the underdog. One last joke for a crowd hungry to be entertained. Their event was a modest one, an obstacle course meant to test trust and skill, not raw power. Eli lined up, heart slamming, aware of the judges' stares, the whispers from the stands. That's the Collins boy. Watch the Mustang bolt. $5 says they don't make it through the first gate, a buzzer blared. Rusty startled, almost breaking sideways. Laughter rippled from the bleachers, sharp and stinging. Eli's hands trembled on the reins. For a breath, the urge to flee almost overwhelmed him. He could feel every eye pressing in, every memory of failure and ridicule piling on top of the present moment. But then, a small thing. Rusty's ear flicked back, searching for Eli's voice. Eli closed his eyes, found the rhythm of his own breath, and let the noise drain away. He leaned forward, not with a command, but with a silent permission. We're here together. It's just you and me. Let's go. Rusty stepped forward, uncertain but moving. The first obstacle was a narrow bridge of planks. Rusty balked, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping at the edge. Eli did not push. He waited, heartbeat pounding, until Rusty found the courage to place a single hoof, then another, and crossed. Slowly, awkwardly, but without panic. The crowd's laughter faded to a hush. A ripple of surprise moved through the arena. Eli tuned out the world and focused on Rusty's breathing, each inhale and exhale in sync. They came to the next obstacle, a tarp spread over the ground, flapping in the wind. Rusty shied, almost spinning away. Eli steadied him with the quiet pressure of his legs and a gentle hand at the withers. He remembered every night in the barn, every setback and small victory, every lesson in patience. The moment stretched, tension trembling in the air, until Rusty, trusting, walked forward. One by one, they faced each challenge. There were mistakes, a knocked rail, a missed cue, moments where Eli's doubt threatened to break through. The crowd never quite let up, but their jeers softened, curiosity sharpening at the edges. Something was changing. The judges leaned forward, interest in their eyes. Midway through, Eli felt it, a flash of perfect, silent understanding between himself and Rusty. He let go of the fear, the weight of expectation. He focused on the horse beneath him. Every muscle, every hesitation, every hopeful try. For the first time, Eli was not riding for the crowd or for redemption. He was riding for Rusty, and for the boy who once believed he didn't belong anywhere. The last obstacle was a series of jumps, not tall, but tricky, set close together to test timing and trust. Eli steadied Rusty, guiding him to the start. The Mustang hesitated, ears flat, legs trembling. Eli's hands were gentle, his voice steady, even if the words lived only inside his chest. Rusty gathered himself, heart pounding, and took the first jump. It was awkward, not graceful, but he cleared it. Another jump, then another, each one building courage from the last. They crossed the finish, not in triumph, but in shared relief. They hadn't won, not by a long shot. Their time was slow, their form unpolished. But they had finished, together. For a heartbeat, the arena was silent. Then, from somewhere in the middle rows, a single clap. Then another, and another. The applause swelled, hesitant at first, then genuine, rolling through the crowd like a summer storm. The same people who had laughed now cheered. Some stood, hats raised, voices calling Rusty's name. Eli slid from the saddle, legs shaking, barely able to breathe. He looked up into Rusty's eyes, wide, uncertain, but proud. All the old doubts fell away. Eli pressed his forehead to Rusty's, sharing a silent promise. We did it. We really did. A stranger caught the moment on a phone, a quick video of the worthless Mustang and the quiet boy. Neither of them noticed the phone, the whispers, or the way the story would begin to spread. Back at the barn that evening, the world felt different. Eli brushed Rusty in the golden light, every gesture slow and grateful. Harold stopped by, silent for a long time, then muttered, "Didn't think you'd do it." His eyes were soft, proud beneath the brim of his old hat. He left before Eli could reply, but Eli caught the smallest of smiles as his grandfather disappeared into the dusk. In the quiet, Eli listened to Rusty's breath and his own. The rodeo was over. They hadn't taken home a ribbon, but what they gained was worth more than trophies or applause. They'd faced the world and walked through it, step by shaky step, proving that hope, no matter how small, can change everything. Outside, the stars flickered to life, and in that vast, forgiving night, Eli and Rusty found the kind of peace that only comes when you know, without doubt, that you belong. It started as a whisper, a handful of comments on a video, a few surprised faces at the diner. Someone had captured Eli and Rusty's rodeo run on their phone, posting it to a local Facebook group with a line that read, "The Mustang and the boy who wouldn't quit." By the end of the week, the video had circled Spring Valley, then spilled beyond county lines. People watched it on their lunch breaks and at kitchen tables, sharing it with a quick, "You gotta see this." Eli didn't know about the video until Leia, a quiet girl from his chemistry class, pressed her phone into his hands. "That's you, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. On the screen, he watched himself, shaking hands, pale as milk, guiding Rusty through the course. The camera caught every stutter and misstep, but also the moments of fierce connection. The bridge crossed, the flapping tarp, the final jump, the embrace at the finish line. The clip ended with a roar of applause and the Mustang's bright, searching eyes. By Monday, everything felt different. At school, people nodded at Eli in the halls. Teachers who'd never noticed him before asked about Rusty. At the ranch, the phone rang almost constantly, reporters wanting interviews, old friends calling to say they'd seen the video, and strangers asking about the miracle horse. Harold, both baffled and amused, started referring to Eli as the local celebrity, but there was a glimmer of pride in the old man's eyes that Eli hadn't seen in years. Then the offers began. First, it was a letter. Heavy cream paper, the logo of a well-known training stable at the top. The letter praised Eli's patience and Rusty's spirit, then offered a hefty sum for the horse. "With our resources, we could make him a champion," it read. "Name your price." Eli stared at the page for a long time, heart thumping. That kind of money would change things. New fences, vet bills, maybe even a chance at college. The next day, a trainer named Caleb drove all the way out from Colorado, pulling into the driveway in a gleaming truck. He was all charm and smooth talk, shaking Harold's hand, patting Rusty's flank, spinning stories of the horses he'd turned into champions. "This Mustang's got something special," Caleb said. "Let me take him on the road. We'll put Spring Valley on the map." He named a figure so high it left Eli dizzy. Harold raised his eyebrows, his mouth twitching at the corners. Eli's mind spun with the possibilities. Wasn't this what everyone wanted? For the ranch, for his future, for Rusty to be seen as more than a reject. But each time he looked at Rusty, standing quietly at his side, Eli felt the answer twisting inside him. Caleb pressed again, offering contracts, even hinting at sponsorships and televised events. He painted a future full of lights and trophies. But as the sun slid behind the hills and the yard filled with long shadows, Eli stepped away from the porch, calling Rusty to him. The Mustang followed, nuzzling Eli's shoulder, trusting and calm. Eli felt the warmth of that trust settle deep in his chest. He returned to Caleb, voice steady. "Thank you, sir, but Rusty's not for sale. Not now, not ever." There was a silence, brief but sharp. Caleb's smile faded, replaced by a look Eli couldn't quite name. Disappointment, maybe, or something colder. He climbed back into his truck, saying, "Think about it. Opportunities like this don't come twice." The days that followed tested Eli's resolve. Other trainers called, some more persistent than Caleb, others almost desperate. A former rodeo champion named Mark even came out to the ranch, promising the world, "Let me take the reins, and your horse will be famous." Eli listened, polite but unmoved. Each time, the answer was the same. Harold, watching all this from his place on the porch, finally spoke up one evening. "Son, you know you don't have to prove anything to anybody. Sometimes the right thing doesn't look like the smart thing." Eli nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Eli wondered, late at night, if he was making a mistake. Was it foolish to turn down what everyone else seemed to want? Yet each dawn, as he watched Rusty in the first light, eyes bright, coat glowing with health, every scar a reminder of the journey they'd traveled together, Eli felt peace settle over him. Fame was a fleeting thing. Money even less reliable. But the bond he had with Rusty, the story they'd written together, that was real. That was his. On the first quiet Sunday in weeks, Eli saddled Rusty and rode out along the old cattle trails, wind in his hair, Mustang's hooves drumming steady beneath him. The hills stretched wide and gold, the sky endless. He realized with a quiet certainty that loyalty mattered more than glory. He chose Rusty, just as Rusty again and again chose him. Back at the ranch, Eli watched the sun go down over the fields, a simple peace rising in his chest. The phone might ring again, and offers might keep coming. But the answer would always be the same. Rusty was not for sale, not at any price. And for the first time in his life, Eli didn't feel like he was missing out. He felt, finally and fully, at home. Eli could feel the change in the air as winter melted away. There was an energy humming beneath the ordinary rhythm of chores, like new grass pushing up through frozen earth. Rusty had grown stronger, his chestnut coat gleaming, his steps sure, his eyes sharp with a wary wisdom. The story of the worthless Mustang and the quiet boy who wouldn't give up had become legend in Spring Valley and beyond. But what now? Eli felt that question stirring in his heart. Every time he looked at Rusty, every time someone new came to the fence just to watch them together. He wanted to do something more, something that would matter, not just for him and Rusty, but for others who felt broken, forgotten, or cast aside. That's when the idea for Rescue a Ride began. Eli brought it up to Harold over breakfast. Awkward at first, unsure how to put into words what he felt. What if we helped other kids, ones like me, ones who don't fit or who just need a chance? We've got the space. Rusty could show them what's possible. Harold listened, stirring his coffee, eyes thoughtful. Then he nodded, just once, and Eli knew they'd do it. They cleaned out the old West barn, swept away the dust, mended fences, and dug out gear that hadn't seen daylight in years. Word spread quickly. A handful of families, a teacher at the high school, the social worker from town, all offering names. Kids came out shyly, some trailing parents, some silent and alone. Most had never been on a horse. Some had never even touched one. Leia was the first. She arrived on a gray morning, arms folded tight, her jaw set in stubborn defiance. She barely spoke, barely looked at Eli or Harold, and refused to meet Rusty's eyes. Instead, she was paired with King, a big bay gelding known for being headstrong and willful. For days, Leia and King seemed locked in silent combat. King refusing to move, Leia refusing to quit. The two matched each other for stubbornness, each step a battle. Eli saw himself in Leia's posture, the way she turned away from kindness, bracing herself for disappointment. He remembered the bitter taste of being left out, of being the target of whispers and stares. So he let Leia and King find their way, never rushing, just being present, offering a quiet word or a steadying hand when needed. Other kids followed. There was Trevor, whose stutter made him the butt of cruel jokes at school. He was paired with Honey, a gentle mare who let him read stories out loud as she grazed. Maya, who'd lost her father that fall, found solace in brushing the old Appaloosa and walking silent circles through the fields. Each child brought their own wounds. Each horse, in their patient, sometimes stubborn way, offered comfort without judgment. The ranch changed. Where once it was quiet and lonely, it became alive with laughter, with the sound of hooves, with cautious greetings and small, brave victories. The air seemed lighter, the sun warmer. Rusty watched all of this, a silent anchor at Eli's side, his own story proof of what could happen when someone chose to believe. It wasn't always easy. Some days the kid's pain was raw, spilling out in anger or silence or tears. Sometimes a horse would balk, or a child would storm off. But Eli remembered his own journey, how healing had come in the quiet, in setbacks, in the slow rebuilding of trust. He taught the kids to wait, to watch, to give each other room. Harold was there too, fixing what was broken, telling stories by the fire, his gruffness hiding a growing tenderness. One evening, just before sunset, Leia finally reached out to King, running a hesitant hand down his neck. The big gelding shuddered, then relaxed. Leia whispered something, too soft for anyone else to hear, but Eli saw the tears shining on her cheeks. Later, she would tell him quietly, "He trusts me." For the first time, her voice held a note of wonder, not anger. Rescue a Ride became more than a project. It became a sanctuary. Word spread. Kids came from neighboring towns, some just to watch, some to try. The ranch's reputation shifted. Not the place with the strange boy and the broken Mustang, but the place where anyone could find a second chance. As spring deepened, Eli found himself standing in the field, the setting sun at his back, Rusty grazing close by. He watched the kids, Leia laughing, Trevor reading, Maya brushing out Honey's tail. He felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, deeper than any trophy, richer than any applause. Rusty nudged his shoulder, and Eli smiled, the two of them bound by the same lesson. Healing, he realized, didn't come in grand moments. It came in small acts of patience, in the space between setbacks, in the willingness to show up again and again, even when the world expects you to fail. The ranch wasn't perfect. None of them were. But it was a place where broken things, given time and kindness, could become beautiful. At the end of each day, as dusk settled over the hills and the last of the kids waved goodbye, Eli stood quietly by Rusty's side, feeling the peace that only comes from doing something that matters. The past still lived in scars and memories, But now it also lived in hope, in laughter, and in the soft, steady heartbeat of trust. And so the ranch became a haven, a beacon for the lost, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are the quietest ones of all. The days at the ranch slipped into a gentle, golden rhythm. The seasons shifted, spring swelling into the hot hum of summer, then drifting into the copper quiet of early autumn. With each passing month, Rescue a Ride became more than a project. It became the beating heart of Eli's world, a place where kids, horses, and even a few wary adults came searching for something softer, something real. Eli felt it everywhere, in the laughter echoing through the old barn, in the easy way Leia now tossed a saddle onto King's back, in Trevor's excited voice reading stories to Honey while the mare dozed under the apple tree. Maya had started to smile again, tracing her fingers along her Appaloosa's nose as she walked with the others at dusk. Even Harold, who'd always worn his silence like armor, had changed, telling stories by lantern light, showing kids how to mend tack, his voice no longer so gruff, his eyes brighter with quiet pride. But the biggest change was inside Eli himself. He moved through his days with a confidence he'd never known, shoulders straight, steps sure. He knew every fence post and hoofprint on the ranch, every old scar on Rusty's coat. And as he brushed Rusty each evening, watching the last light fade across the hills, Eli reflected on the winding path that had brought them here. The auctions, the ridicule, the long, silent nights filled with doubt. Sometimes, he found himself standing at the edge of the pasture, watching a new group of kids arrive. He saw their hesitation, the way they clung to the fence, unsure if they belonged. And he remembered, with an ache both sweet and sharp, what it was like to be that kid, the one who never quite fit, who felt invisible until someone, or some horse, chose to see them. One evening, Eli lingered at the corral, the sky streaked pink and gold. He watched Leia canter King around the ring, her hair flying, a wide smile on her face. Harold leaned on the gate beside him, silent for a long while. Finally, the old man spoke. "Didn't think I'd see the ranch like this again. Didn't think we'd ever find something worth keeping." Eli looked at him, seeing not just the lines of age and worry, but the hope that had been rebuilt between them, slowly, patiently, like the trust between horse and rider. As summer waned, Eli and Rusty took long rides along the ridge. The fields stretched wide and golden, the air full of promise. On one such evening, as the sun burned low, Eli let the reins fall slack, letting Rusty find his own path. The Mustang's stride was strong, his coat bright as fire in the fading light. Eli felt a profound peace, a sense of arrival he'd never dared to hope for. For so long he'd chased after belonging, after some mark of worth in a world that only saw his differences. But here, surrounded by laughter and quiet understanding, he realized his purpose had never been about trophies or applause. It was about this, giving back what he'd been given, building something that would last long after the crowds forgot their names. A place where the lost could find their way, where wounds could become wisdom, where the stubborn kindness of one boy and one Mustang could spark a legacy that would ripple far beyond their own lives. There were still hard days. Some children arrived too hurt to trust, some horses too scarred to heal quickly. Eli learned to meet each new story with patience, to celebrate tiny victories, a hand outstretched, a smile given, a whispered thank you. He watched others, Leia, Trevor, Maya, step into roles of mentorship, showing new kids the gentle way, teaching by example just as he and Rusty had taught them. One afternoon, the local news came out to do a feature on Rescue a Ride. Cameras rolled as Eli explained the program, his voice steady, eyes clear. He didn't talk about fame or hardship. He talked about hope, about trust, about the ways patience could mend things no one else believed in. When the reporter asked what made the ranch special, Eli simply said, "Sometimes, the ones nobody believes in are the ones who change everything." That night, as dusk pooled in the valleys and the barn lights glowed warm against the dark, Eli saddled Rusty for one more ride. They climbed the ridge together, pausing at the summit as a breeze rattled the grass. Eli looked out over the ranch, the old barns, the winding trails, the corral full of laughter, and felt the depth of what they'd built. Rusty stood beside him, steady and sure, a living reminder that every broken thing, given enough care, could become something whole. Eli understood now. His life wasn't about being a champion, or even being understood by everyone. It was about legacy, the kind measured in kindness, in the quiet resilience that survives ridicule and doubt, in the willingness to show up for the ones no one else will claim. As the sun slipped away, Eli leaned forward, resting his head on Rusty's neck. They had traveled a long, uncertain road, but tonight, under the wide open sky, Eli felt ready to trust the future. Below them, the lights of the ranch twinkled, voices floating up on the wind. And as they rode down the ridge, Eli knew, sometimes, the smallest acts of hope leave the biggest mark on the world. Sometimes, believing in the impossible is the most important thing you can do. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the world in copper and lavender. From the ridge above the ranch, you could see the winding trails, the corrals alive with laughter, and the old barn that had become a beacon for kids and horses alike. Eli stood beside Rusty, both of them silhouetted by the coming night, a boy and his Mustang, bound together by every bruise, every hope, every quiet victory they'd shared. If you listen close, you can almost hear their story echo across the valley. Not a tale of fame or riches, but of patience, resilience, and the stubborn grace that comes from believing in what others have given up on. This is the real legacy Eli and Rusty built together, and it lives on not just in memory, but in every heart touched by their courage. I want to step out from behind the story, just for a moment, and talk to you. Not as Eli, not as a rancher, not as a legend, but as someone who has seen again and again the power of quiet belief. Maybe you felt invisible, overlooked, or dismissed. Maybe the world has tried to tell you that your scars make you less capable, less worthy, less able to dream. I'm here to tell you, the world is wrong. Every scar, every setback, every wound is also a story of surviving, of learning, of becoming strong in a way that can't be seen from the outside. The truth is, every life, human or animal, has value. Sometimes that value is hidden, worn thin by hardship or dulled by years of neglect. Sometimes the only thing separating a lost cause from a miracle is one person willing to wait, to hope, to try one more time. Rusty taught me that. So did Harold. So did every kid who found their way to our ranch, carrying burdens they never deserved to bear. The ranch isn't perfect. We've had setbacks. Some horses never fully trust. Some kids leave before they're ready. And some days the only thing to do is sit quietly and let the world move past you. But every day, we try again. Every day, we look for the smallest sign of hope, the tiniest act of kindness, a soft word, a shared silence, a hand outstretched. Over time, those moments stack up. They become the backbone of healing. the foundation of all lasting change. I want to invite you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening, to carry this story with you. Share your own stories of quiet triumphs and unlikely bonds. Be the person who sees worth where others see weakness. If you know someone who needs a second chance, be the hand that reaches out. If you've found your own Rusty, an animal, a friend, even a forgotten part of yourself, cherish that connection. Protect it. Let it teach you. We live in a world quick to judge, quick to discard, always searching for the next big thing, but real strength isn't loud. It isn't showy. It's gentle. It's persistent. It's the quiet courage of a boy who walked a frightened horse home through the dusk, refusing to believe that broken things can't be made whole. At Rescue a Ride, we've learned that healing never happens all at once. It's 1,000 small steps, 1,000 setbacks and recoveries, stitched together by hope. The greatest lessons are the ones that sneak up on you in the dark. Patience is stronger than pride. Kindness outlasts anger. And the ones nobody believes in, they're often the ones who change everything. So if this story moved you, don't let it stop at the closing credits. Take it with you. Let it shape how you see the world, how you treat yourself and others. Share it with someone who needs it. Support programs in your community that give second chances to people, to animals, to anyone written off as not enough. And if you want to be part of our journey, we'd love to hear your story too. At the end of the day, as the last light fades and the ranch falls quiet, Eli and Rusty walk together beneath the stars, a living testament to what can happen when hope refuses to die. They invite you to join them, to believe a little harder, to hold on a little longer, to look for the good in unexpected places. Because sometimes, the smallest, simplest acts of kindness are the ones that save us all. If you enjoyed our story, please like and follow our channel for more journeys of hope and second chances. And remember, every story, no matter how humble, has the power to change a life. Sometimes, even the world. Thank you for listening. The ride continues, and we hope you'll be part of it.